Hello and welcome to Scientists for Open Science, PLOS's ongoing campaign that brings researchers and stakeholders together from around the globe to share perspectives on open science. My name is Dan Morgan. I'm the Director of Communications and Community Relations here at PLOS, and I'm joined today by Dr. Cristiana Bercea and Dr. Robert Darby to have a conversation about community building in open research. If I could invite you both to just briefly introduce yourselves, starting with you, Cristiana.
Thank you. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Reading. I've been working as a postdoc for a couple of years now in the field of vascular biology. I work in the School of Chemistry, Food and Pharmacy here at the University of Reading, so I'm representing a group of open research champions from my school. Before working as a postdoc, I did a PhD in cellular molecular physiology in neuroscience. So I've got perspectives from vascular physiology and neuroscience, as well as pharmacology and chemistry. And Robert will tell you more about our Open Research Champions program. But as I said, I'm representing the champions in my school, and I'm also representing the champions throughout the university on the university's Committee for Open Research and Research Integrity.
Fantastic. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you. So I'm the research data manager at the University of Reading. I've been here for over 7 years now. I'm based in the research engagement team, which is in the library. And in addition to data management, that provides research publishing, research analytics services. I've also been involved since about 2017 in developing an evolving program of communication and engagement with our research community, which is based around the theme of open research or open science, if you will.
Continuing with you, Robert, could you tell me more about the Open Research Champions program and any inspirations and fellow organizations that you work with?
Yeah, sure. Well, the idea is very simple. It's to recruit and build up a community of allies amongst the researchers at our university who can model good practice, amplify communications, and propagate knowledge and skills within their local networks. So we give these champions training, ideas for what they can do. We provide support, we maintain communications with them, and we offer small amounts of funding as well to support activities. For example, if they want to organize a workshop or invite an external speaker, attend a conference, that sort of thing, providing it's all towards the aim of increasing open research activity and knowledge within the institution. The model that we took for our program was a very successful Data Champions program, which has been running for several years at the University of Cambridge, organized by their Office for Scholarly Communications. And when I was designing our program, I took advice from Sasha Jones, who's the research data manager at Cambridge. She was running the Data Champions program at the time. Our program had a slightly different scope and slightly different objectives from the Cambridge program, but the mechanics were largely built on the Cambridge model. We also looked at the open science communities, which are university-based networks that originated in the Netherlands, but I think they are spreading internationally now and springing up in other countries as well. And we've also been inspired by the UK Reproducibility Network, which is a very active peer-led consortium in the UK that promotes improvement in research culture through capability building in member institutions. So those were some of the inspirations really for this sort of community building activity. And how we went about it, we published a call for open research champions in the university earlier this year, inviting applications from members of staff and research students. We didn't necessarily want open research experts. We wanted being a champion to be educational in itself, but we did want evidence of interest in and enthusiasm for open research. And in the end, we appointed 19 champions across 9 of the schools in our university, including some in the humanities and social sciences. This isn't just about the physical and life sciences for us. Most were early career researchers or research students, but we did have some more senior academics as well. And this is our first intake. We plan to recruit further cohorts in succeeding years on an annual basis. We ask people to commit for 12 months to the role of being a champion, but they can continue longer in the role if they wish. So once we'd recruited early in the spring, we had an induction session for our new champions in April. And then basically the rest was up to them. We try not to ask too much of them because it is a voluntary role. So I think it's up to them to decide what sort of level of activity they're comfortable with. But we do at the very least expect them to model good practice, so to share their data, for example, and to be able to signpost support to their peers. If they want to be more active, then they're very welcome to do so. And even though it is early days in our program, I think we're already seeing evidence of champions getting stuck into substantive projects. And that's something that Cristiana will be able to tell you more about.
Yeah, I'd love to. So across the university, as Robbie said, we've got representatives in the sciences and also in the humanities. And what we're working on are 3 projects which have just started going now. The aim is to engage, obviously, our peers. So we've been organizing a survey to understand what the community and university needs, what their interest is in open research, and what we can help them with. So this is a survey that's going to cover everybody from undergraduate to professor level. And we want to see how interested they are in things like open access publications, open software and hardware. Preprints is obviously a topic we're all very keen on promoting, and also educational tools. We are also covering where they can find information and advice about open research and making it known that we are their first point of contact if they need any sort of information. We want to discuss with them what the advantages are and the opportunities for open research, and also very importantly, understanding what the barriers may be or the challenges so that we can address those. The survey is also an opportunity to inform the participants of the opportunities that there are throughout the university to promote open research practices, of which there are quite a few. So we're using the survey also as a sort of workshop to explain to people what they can do. And finally, and this is quite important, we want to make clear that we're offering training if anybody needs it, in the form of workshops, for example, about the pipeline of publishing preprints, because the actual pipeline is fairly simple, but I find that many researchers abstain from getting involved in publishing preprints because there's this idea that it's a rather complicated process, which it isn't. So we'll be happy to provide people with more information about that. Our second project is an open hardware workshop where anybody interested can simply go and learn how to use open hardware, open software, be provided with whatever equipment they need. And the way we're going to do it is organize a little competition where people will have to build hardware that can be used in a lab, for example. So this is going to be mostly targeted at people in the School of Chemistry, Food and Pharmacy, which is where I work. In my experience, this sort of thing is very useful, and I have worked in labs where actually creating our own hardware using open access resources was immensely helpful. So we're quite excited about that. And finally, I am working on a pilot to introduce the more widespread use of electronic lab notebooks. At the moment, the vast majority of researchers in my field still use the good old paper lab books that we all know and love. So this obviously comes with some limitations. You know, data is lost fairly easily if it's on paper. 5 years from now, if I want to see what someone did, it might be difficult to find the methods, find the raw data. So going digital is basically going to help everybody, and it's going to make it easier for collaborators or scientists across the world to see what everybody's done and what their actual data is. I'm championing the use of OneNote as an electronic lab notebook. What we did is we organized a workshop, taking participants or interested participants through a range of available software packages that can be used for this. The structure ideas came from similar pilots at the University of Cambridge and Glasgow. And together we selected a number of packages which people were interested in using, and then eventually narrowed it down to OneNote. So that's underway at the moment. One of my main interests here was to get PhD students involved, especially first-year PhD students, because this is when they learn how to keep a lab notebook. And I think by bringing them together and creating a community of OneNote users, then it's a really great way of learning how to organize your lab book. And in my experience, the way you learn to keep a lab book in your first year is the way you're going to do it for the rest of your career. So by introducing this practice now, I think it's going to make things much easier and more streamlined for everybody down the line.
Fantastic. No, I mean, that's phenomenal amount of projects there. I mean, you use the word normalization, which I think, you know, is key here, isn't it? Like, how important is this community building in, you know, when normalizing a research practice rather than making it always seem like an obstacle or an administrative burden to be compliant or something?
Yeah, the reason I mentioned obstacles before is that I find most people are very interested in promoting or using open research. But because it's not particularly, it's not the norm, it's promoted as having to be the norm, but it's not the norm at the moment. It's just something in the back of everybody's mind that yes, we need to do this. But I find giving people a little bit of an incentive or a little bit of a nudge forward, making things easy, providing workshops and training is the best way to incentivize people to use more open research practices, leading by example, so to speak.
Yeah, Robert, I'll ask you: are you seeing the effect of this community building in kind of normalizing, you know, good open research practices?
So we're in a young stage, but so far I've seen a lot of interest, seen a lot of people wanting to participate and wanting to learn more. So I think, especially at the level of postgraduate students, I think that's great because you're engaging people at the stage in their career when they're learning how to be a scientist.
And Robert, you are on mute, by the way, but would love your perspectives on that.
Yes, I think it's early days for us. I mean, this is the first year for our Champions program, but you know, I'm already inspired and enthused by how dynamic and engaged some of our open research champions are, and you know, how they're managing to engage the people within their networks as well. I mean, I think community building from the ground up is absolutely essential. One of the challenges that you know, that I constantly come up against as a member of the university's professional services is converting, you know, the messaging that I put out into real change in behavior, real change on the ground in that day-to-day activity of research. How do we actually increase the rates of data and code sharing in our institution? How do we increase the use of reproducible research practices and decrease the use of questionable research practices? We're trying to change behavior. We're trying to change the way our researchers behave. And just telling researchers, you know, to do something new or in a different way, that alone is not going to make a big difference if they don't learn those behaviors from their working environments, from their peer networks. And I think that peer effect, the power of example, is so much more effective than someone in an office in central command telling you what they think you should be doing.
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, even in my career in publishing, you know, making something easy and making something kind of be the same as what everyone else is doing is the only ways you can actually, the most effective ways to change behavior like that. That's fascinating to hear. So, I mean, what are some of the most, I mean, you've mentioned kind of questionable or good research practices. What are some of the most important things that the communities can help with or achieve, bearing in mind, you know, current contexts, pandemic, reproducibility crises? You know, I mean, that's been going on for quite some time now, I suppose. But you know, what are some of the most important things that you think communities should focus on, you know, in some of this normalizing behaviors? Starting with you again, Cristiana.
Sure. In my experience, irreproducibility is a major problem, and part of that comes from people researchers not sharing their methods in enough detail and not sharing the raw data. So often people just publish, you know, their analyzed, polished data. So to avoid this, publishing preprints is a very good practice, and making your raw data available is also something we're always pushing people to do more of. Now, with respect to reproducibility, one of the problems here, I think, is the fact that there's not much incentive for people to actually try to reproduce data from other labs, because if your data isn't new, then it doesn't get published as easily. So what I'm quite keen on is to inspire people to try the same experiments that other people have done, see if you get the same results, see how your experience with their methods relates to their experience with their methods. Things don't always work the same in the hands of different researchers. So incentivizing people to feel that reproducing someone else's work is just as valuable as doing novel work would go a long way toward educating people to you know, produce more reproducible research, because it's an incentive. If you have to be able to reproduce someone else's work, then your own work is going to be more rigorous and well documented, because you know someone else is going to have to look at your work and try to see if they can do it. So that's a good incentive.
Yeah. Would you agree, Robert?
Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, reproducibility and concerns about rates of reproducibility of published research, that there's been discussion of this over the last several years. And, you know, we have seen organizations like the UK Reproducibility Network and allied organizations in other countries evolving really to respond to some of the concerns about research culture that may not incentivize reproducible research practice. I mean, there are systemic problems here, and you know, what individual researchers, what institutions on their own can do to change those systemic problems may be small in themselves, but they can build and gradually, you know, what is the minority way of doing things may, as examples multiply, become more and more the dominant way of doing things, and gradually you'll find that, you know, disciplinary norms evolve, they change, cultures change, and we would hope they change for the better. I mean, the sorts of things that we want to encourage in many respects, they're basic. Share your data, but share your data in appropriate ways. Use a data repository. Don't provide your data as supplementary files alongside an article, or don't say data will be available upon reasonable request, which is a data availability statement that rather infuriates me. And document your data with appropriate information about the methods by which the data were acquired, were processed, were analyzed, and so on and so forth. But I think, you know, it's those basic messages are still struggling to get through in a lot of cases. There was an article published in Scientometrics earlier this year, I think, which was looking at data sharing associated with COVID-19 related publications. And they looked at nearly 6,000 publications between December 2019, April 2020, and under 14% actually published underlying research data. 14% of those publications. Less than 2% reference data held in a data repository. And you would think if there is a reason in the world today why people ought to be sharing data, it is in response to a global pandemic. And yet we're still seeing abysmal rates of data sharing. So, you know, there are still significant challenges, I think, to be overcome in changing behavior. But, you know, I think these sorts of community efforts are the ways that we will gradually build those evolving norms of behavior and change them. So again, yes, I mean, I come back to the power of peer networks in taking the sort of messages that I tried to put out as a research data manager and turning them into behavior that is adopted by researchers, that is imitated, that gradually develops into those norms, which will over time evolve into the standard ways of doing things. And I think, you know, all research performing organizations need to be developing these sorts of initiatives among their researchers and fostering them and supporting them and empowering researchers really to take ownership of these problems and of finding the solutions to these problems.
Thank you. Turning to your individual perspectives more again. I mean, as you said, that some of the open science, the Open Research Champions program is open to people kind of new to open research, so it could be an educational kind of activity in and of itself. But I have a suspicion that both of you were perhaps interested in this before you got involved, and I was wondering if there was any particular moment or reason or kind of activity you witnessed that got you more particularly interested in open research and reproducibility, Cristiana?
Definitely. My motivation comes from directly witnessing problems arising in my research due to irreproducibility of other people's research, due to data being unclear or unavailable, problems such as sharing resources with other labs, where I was simply told, I'm going to send you something, but I'm not sure what's in it because we lost the label, or the person's lab book is so old we can't find the information in it. And another thing I've seen happen frequently is because people don't take care to be very rigorous about the way they record their methods and the way they record where their raw data is coming from and what they did with it. Because this sort of information is sometimes difficult to come by, especially if it's a few years old from your predecessor, for example. What happens is you need to spend time repeating whatever experiments they did, which is a waste of time and a massive waste of money, because if an experiment has been done properly, then you should be able to know exactly what happened, instead of just looking at the figure or final graph or something like that, and trying to kind of deduce what the previous scientist did. So this is my motivation, because I was exposed directly to these problems, and I saw how it could have potentially impacted my work negatively. So seeing it directly in on a couple of occasions has made me quite keen to promote ways of avoiding these problems in my lab and in the labs of my colleagues. This is why I'm so keen to discuss these things with PhDs, because a lot of these problems not because people are deliberately trying to make anybody's life more difficult, but because perhaps there's not a lot of training for young scientists in with respect to making their work accessible, collaborative, things like that. Because typically, most of us are very busy, and people, as Robert said, it's about changing behavior. So because everybody's very busy and everybody has a way of doing things already, I can see why it's difficult to change the paradigm. So so my incentive for helping to change the paradigm is not seeing the problems I've encountered repeated in the case of other people.
Robert.
Yes, I think for me, as a research data manager, probably about 2 or so years into my job at the University of Reading, I guess there seemed to be a lot of discussion, which was in the press, and in some cases in the mainstream press, about whether or not there was a reproducibility crisis in science. I think this is about 2016 or something. It suddenly seemed to be that everybody was talking about it, and I think at the time at the university we were also, myself and also my colleagues who support open access publishing, rather frustrated, I think, trying to push messages of policy compliance, and perhaps feeling that maybe there were more productive ways in which we could develop dialogue with our research community, and specifically develop the motivation on the part of researchers to do the good thing, to share their data, for example, not because there was a policy that said you have to do this, but because it made sense for them and for their research and for the communities that they worked in. And I think it felt to me that using that sort of open research, open science discourse, focusing on a language of benefits, might be a way to forge a more positive engagement with the idea of using specific practices such as sharing data and code. So I think that's where things sort of began for me, really, and where, as a research data manager, I was perhaps trying to think and talk more holistically about open research and about a spectrum of practices in which data sharing very much has its part, but which might include other things like using preprints, for example, to accelerate dissemination of research, or like engaging with open peer review models to make the process of certifying research more transparent than the traditional closed review process. And tying all of those things together within this sort of encompassing concept of open research, or with these larger concepts of research reproducibility, research quality, research culture, seemed to me, potentially quite a productive way to try to develop the conversation within our institutional research community and to promote engagement. And I guess I've been involved in sort of building the Open Research Initiative at the university out of the kernel of that idea. And we've done various things at the university. We've had a couple of open research themed conferences for our staff and students. One of the things we did was we developed, and twice now we've run an open research award competition. So we encourage people to basically submit entries which are case studies describing how they've used open practices in their work, and finalists are shortlisted and get to present their case studies at an event, and there's a panel that chooses a winner, and there are cash prizes as well. So it's a way of trying to generate some of the incentives to actually think about engaging with open practices on the part of researchers. So we've done things like that, and the Open Research Champions program also developed out of this sort of open research initiative at the university. And in fact, it's part of a portfolio of activities really that are being undertaken at the university through a funded open research action plan. So it's been funded to the tune of £42,000 for a program of activities over 3 years, 2021 to 2023. And I think one of the things that open research, open science has given us is a sort of language in which to talk to the senior management within our institution and to get them to sort of buy into and engage with some of the things that we're trying to do, to the extent that they're willing to fund these activities. So I think it's been very helpful in that respect. And another thing that we did at the organization was we published an open research statement, which is basically a sort of statement of commitment on the part of the university to the principles and aims of open research, and a call to our research community to engage with using open research practices in their work. And I think the process of developing and publishing that statement was also a good pretext to have those conversations with senior management and with members of the research community as well, and to start building that dialogue and developing a sort of shared language and a common sense of purpose within the university.
I mean, I think that's wonderful. One of the things we'll be doing in the week that this video gets released is seeing if we can get all researchers globally to sign a statement of commitment to kind of open science and open research values and principles. So, and I very much, love what you're saying about, this notion of creating discourses and a shared vocabulary, because, from my perspective, one of the biggest problems I've had is, talking about preprints or talking about open peer review when there's not specific kind of definitions sometimes of what exactly it can entail, and B, if someone is just, when in discussions around preprints, sometimes you can have people say the same statement, but some people like it and some people don't. The notion of it's not peer reviewed. Some people can say, well, we don't like preprints because they're not peer reviewed. And then another person can say, I like preprints because they're not peer reviewed. Therefore, we can all join in reviewing it. It's a fascinating, and I love hearing about this kind of these community efforts, which is about from the ground up, like in a community, understanding and talking about all these rather than being told from a funder or a government or a publisher or whatever, this is what it means, this is how you do it, and just having a community kind of understand it together is fantastic. We're approaching the end of our time, so I'll finish with a couple of quick fire questions. I just thought of these, so sorry to spring these on you, but if there was one, thinking in terms of vocabularies and how they can help with misconceptions or misperceptions or things like that, if there was one thing you could change, one misperception you could change tomorrow in a nice community-oriented way, what would that be? What would be a good leap forward? Again, start with you, Cristiana.
I would address the misconception that the only data worth publishing is the novel data. I would love to see more negative results published, for example, because that spares a lot of people the pain of doing the same sort of experiments or investigating the same hypothesis and not knowing that someone else has already done that and not having someone to discuss it with. So yeah, publishing negative results and definitely reproducing already existing results is as important as publishing. A result, I would like to address the misconception of what a result is. A result for your research can be negative, can be saying that you found something else, something different from somebody else who did the same sort of experiment. That is very much a result. It's very, very important.
Excellent. How about you, Robert?
Well, I guess maybe for me, perhaps one thing is more perhaps an attitude or a perception than a misconception, which is perhaps the sort of proprietary attitudes that researchers might have when it comes to their data, my data. It seems to me that, you know, if you are putting forward claims on the public record, truth claims, you say we've done this research, we've found this result, and you know this is the claim that we are making in our published research. If you're putting that on record, then you have to be willing to be transparent with the evidence behind those claims. And to an extent, once you go on public record, they're not your data any longer. I mean, look, putting aside for a moment the fact that you know, a lot of these data, a lot of this research are generated with public funding. You know, it's taxpayers' money that is producing this research and the evidence, you know, that supports the research. But also, if you are putting your truth claims onto the public record, then you have a public responsibility also to be transparent with the evidence behind those truth claims. And you have to accept, you know, that at the point you go on public record, that they're not absolutely your data any longer, if they ever were. And you can't put a fence around them, and you can't say, I will decide who gets to come in and view my data. You have an obligation to be open, and that involves accepting that you may lose a degree of control over how your data are used, just as you lose control over how your published research outputs are read and interpreted and used by other people.
So well put. I mean, it's like we need to change the value of data to be that the value you get from it is, your reward is with sharing it rather than holding it for all of your future rewards, right? I mean, this has been great. I mean, I feel like we could all three of us talk about this topic for the next few hours and probably even have like a 3-day conference about it all. And these things exist. So thank you so much for your time, Cristiana and Robert. Despite all these reproducibility crises and, you know, full sharing of COVID-19 data and issues, I'm still somewhat hopeful that things are getting better, because I think by your community efforts, we're seeing cohorts of scientists, you know, coming in actually just writing exquisite methods and sharing data just because that's what you do, rather than that's what a journal asks for. So I hope you agree. Do you see that kind of positivity? Yeah,
definitely. Even the fact that we're having this conversation and, you know, organizing these events, very positive, obviously. Yeah. There is quite a lot of optimism.
Fantastic. No, I'm glad to hear it. And like I said, I can't thank you enough. I mean, PLOS ourselves, we're trying to kind of enhance and encourage and empower researchers to do all of these things that you and your communities are trying to do. And I just love the fact that we can all work together, you know, and, you know, on this mission and this aim, and just really trying to ensure that we can represent and empower everybody for their maximum potential. Thank you again so much. We'll leave it there, and thank you all of the watchers for watching this content during our Scientists for Open Science campaign. Thank you again.